Thanksgiving used to be one of the few times Nora Delaney truly felt like she belonged to a family. No matter how exhausted she was from night shifts or how long the bus ride was from Minneapolis, she always showed up, carrying a small gift, a loaf of crusty bread, or simply her quiet presence at the table. She never asked for anything, just a chair, her mother's warm laughter, her father's quiet nod, and a brief sense of peace without needing to explain herself. But this year, a single phone call erased all of that. "Nora, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving," her father said over the phone, his tone light, as if he were reminding her to pick up more salt. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. "Sorry, what?" she asked, her breath catching. "It's just better to keep things calm. Mandy's been a bit on edge lately, you know." She set her teacup down. The sound of ceramic hitting wood cracked the silence like a splinter in her chest. Mandy again. Always Mandy. Her younger sister, the princess, sheltered from consequences, wrapped in excuses. And now, Mandy's fragility was reason enough to exile Nora from the family table. Nora used to think that if she worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, eventually they'd see her worth. That she didn't need to make a scene to be valued. She just had to keep giving. But she was wrong. To them, she was just a name on a bank statement, a ghost who paid on time, who didn't disrupt the peace. When her father said, "It's just one day," her heart turned as cold as the frost outside. One day, after sending over $8,000 in quiet support? One day, and it had to be the only one where she ever truly felt seen? She hung up before the tears could fall, not out of rage, but from the still sharp ache of realization that this winter wouldn't just be cold, it would be the season where she finally understood what it meant to be left out in the cold by the people she once called home. There are roles in a family that no one assigns, yet someone always ends up carrying them. For Nora Delaney, that role was the one who fixes everything. No one told her to do it. No one thanked her when she did. But when something went wrong, from unpaid heating bills to a broken furnace to her mother's late-night sobs in the dead of winter, they all called her. Nora wasn't the traditional definition of the good daughter. She didn't call home often, didn't attend every family event, didn't post loving tributes to her parents on social media. But when the old house on Elm Street was freezing in January, she was the one who woke at 3 a.m. to transfer $600 so the heating would stay on. When the furnace clanked and clattered in March and her mother cried on the phone, it was Nora who found the repairman and paid the bill up front. No one brought it up again. They just kept living, as if miracles happened on schedule. And Mandy? Her younger sister had an entire cheer squad within the family. One failed dream after another. A candle business that tanked, a podcast no one listened to, a plan to start a local fashion magazine that lasted all of 3 weeks. Every time she failed, Mandy was comforted. She's still young. Everyone makes mistakes. Let her explore. Meanwhile, Nora, the one patching the financial holes left behind, was never asked if she was okay. She remembered one night in September vividly. Her bank app pinged, $400 withdrawn for the family's heating oil. She was in the middle of her warehouse shift, arms sore from hours of lifting. Meanwhile, Mandy posted a story, a $7 latte in a vintage cafe captioned Self-Care Day. Nora didn't feel jealous. She just felt tired. Tired of being the one who quietly opened her wallet so others could sparkle in the spotlight. Every time she sent money, Nora didn't expect gratitude. She just hoped they wouldn't forget she existed. But year after year, her sacrifices were treated like a default setting. Once, she overheard her father saying at a family gathering, "At least Mandy's creative." "Nora's always so quiet. You never know what she's thinking." The words were light, offhand, but they pierced. Not because they misunderstood her, but because they never even tried to. Her parents weren't bad people. They were just used to Nora being strong. And when you're strong, people think you don't need comfort, that you don't need to be asked, that you'll carry the family on your back, and if one day you stop, you're the problem. There is a kind of injustice that doesn't shout. It sits quietly in the silence when sacrifice is mistaken for obligation. That's the injustice of the quiet one, the one who shows up in every storm, but is never invited to sit by the fire. Nora understood this fully when she was pushed out of Thanksgiving dinner because Mandy was stressed. No one asked how she felt. No one protected her from hurt. She simply wasn't considered. But from that shadowed corner she'd been pushed into, Nora began to see her own worth more clearly. She wasn't just a financial fallback. She was the one who had kept the house warm through 2 brutal winters, the one who had put kindness before herself. And now, she too had a choice. Not because she stopped loving them, but because she was learning at last how to love herself. That night, in her small apartment furnished with nothing more than a worn wooden table, a single chair, and the quiet hum of a space heater in the corner, Nora Delaney sat motionless in front of her laptop. Her fingers, cold from the draft slipping in through the window, hovered over the keyboard. On the screen, a small red button blinked. Cancel recurring payment. So simple. Just one click. But for her, it wasn't a digital action. It was a declaration. She had been thinking about this moment for days, ever since the icy phone call from her father, when she was told she wasn't needed for Thanksgiving because Mandy needed peace. She had walked block after block, watching snow settle like crushed crystal on the sidewalks, her heart heavy, not with rage, but with the hollowness of being erased. When you exist only to make others comfortable, you stop existing for yourself. Canceling the heating payments wasn't childish revenge. It was symbolic, a turning point. She could no longer warm a house where she was no longer welcome. The winters ahead would be cold in that old house on Elm Street, just as cold as the way they made her feel when they pushed her aside. Nora once believed that kindness should never come with conditions. She had sent money at midnight, set up monthly payments, called companies to double-check everything was working. But now, when even a seat at the holiday table was too much to offer in return, she knew it was time to stop. She scrolled down to the confirmation prompt. "Are you sure you want to cancel this service?" A simple line, but to her, it echoed louder. "Are you sure you no longer want to carry this weight?" She closed her eyes. Behind her lids were images from another time. Her mother in the old kitchen baking pumpkin pie, her father unfolding the morning newspaper, Mandy laughing on the couch at some silly TikTok. Then the images faded, because the reality was this. None of them had seen her skipping meals to send extra money, shivering in a thin jacket because a new one was out of budget. She clicked. The screen flashed a message. Service will end on November 2nd, 1 month before Thanksgiving. Nora stayed still. She didn't feel immediate relief. Instead, there was a deep, quiet silence. Like the silence after setting down something you've carried too long. No one else would notice, but she would. And that was enough. Outside, snow fell in soundless sheets. She walked to the window, watching the flakes bury each step, each crack in the pavement. In her mind, She saw the old house, windows frosting over, the furnace quiet. They would notice, but not right away. Mandy would keep believing the world revolved around her. Dad would rage. Mom would quietly cry. But Nora Delaney, for the first time, would walk into winter no longer trembling from decisions that weren't hers. When Nora Delaney canceled the heating payment for the house she grew up in, it wasn't just a logistical decision. It was an unspoken declaration, a long, quiet exhale after 2 winters spent battling more than just the cold. She had fought the frost, yes, but also the chill of being unseen. She didn't yell, didn't send a long message, didn't call to confront anyone. She simply fell silent. But this silence was not weakness. It was dense with every unacknowledged sacrifice, every tear she had swallowed, every overlooked gesture of care. For 2 years, Nora had stood as a shadow behind the warmth of her family. She quietly paid the bills when her parents couldn't afford heating. She stepped in financially after Mandy's failed ventures, candle businesses, podcasts, fashion dreams that lasted less than a season. No one thanked her. No one even asked if she could afford it. They just expected it. And Nora, believing that helping family was the right thing to do, never questioned it until she was excluded from Thanksgiving, told to stay away for Mandy's peace. The first text arrived a week after the service was cut. From her mother, gentle but loaded with assumption. "Nora, I think something's wrong with the heating. Can you check it?" She read it 3 times. No greeting, no apology, just a request, business as usual. And as always, they assumed she'd respond. But this time, Nora didn't. She let the message sit like a quiet symbol of change. No longer would she be the one who shows up unconditionally. No longer would she offer warmth to a place that treated her like a utility. Then Mandy texted, "So childish." 3 words, no greeting, just condescension. Mandy probably expected a defensive reply, a long justification. But Nora smiled, set her phone down, and went back to her tea. Her silence was her armor, her way of finally saying, "I will no longer let your judgment dictate my worth." On day 10, her father called 12 times. Then a text, "Call me back." This isn't funny. But Nora no longer lived in a world where her value was measured by how quickly she responded to distress calls. In the real world, her new world, she had boundaries. Her silence wasn't revenge. It was resistance, a statement without sound, a way of saying, "I've given enough. Now, I'm keeping something for myself." In the following days, her phone buzzed with messages, some frantic, some bitter. "Mandy's sick. Dad won't wear his coat. Mom can't feel her hands." She didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Because if she replied, she'd fall back into the trap, the dependable one, the fixer, the fallback fund. And she was done being that. Each morning, Nora woke in her tiny apartment, pulled back the curtain, and watched the snow fall. She brewed ginger tea, curled up near the heater, and read a novel. No guilt. No anxiety. For the first time, winter was hers alone. Every moment of silence was a step toward healing, a reminder that she was not invisible, not just a living bank account, and that love could not survive on one-sided sacrifice. She remembered past winters, choosing between a new coat or sending money, shivering in her cold room, whispering to herself, "As long as they're warm, I'll be okay." But not this year. This year, Nora kept her own warmth. Silence became her protection, her clarity. It didn't make her heartless, it made her whole. She learned that love without respect is erosion, that giving without boundaries is self-erasure. And sometimes, the first step to being heard is to stop speaking. That afternoon, snow was falling heavily, like old memories that had never been spoken aloud. White flakes covered the small balcony where Nora had kept a dried lavender pot. The city was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in deep winter, when even the wind sounds like it's whispering secrets through the cracks in old windows. Nora was curled up on her sofa, a novel in hand, a steaming cup of ginger tea beside her, and the soft hum of the space heater filling the room with comfort. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang, urgent, impatient. She placed the book down and walked quietly to the hallway. Her chest tightened when she looked through the peephole. Standing in the snow was her father, the man who had once been her whole world, now hunched and weathered by the cold. His coat was ill-fitting, his cheeks flushed red from the wind, and his eyes, tired, sunken, held something between familiarity and distance. She cracked the door slightly, allowing a stream of warm air to meet the frozen gusts outside. The contrast between them was stark. He looked at her for a long moment, seemingly unsure of where to begin. Then his voice, rough and worn, broke the silence. "Nora, we need to talk." She didn't invite him in. She just stood there, leaning against the door frame, holding the space between them like a boundary long overdue. He continued, his breath forming pale clouds in the air. "You cut the heat. The house is freezing. Your mom's had a fever since yesterday. Mandy locked herself in her room. It's down to 38 degrees. How long are you going to let this go on?" His tone wasn't accusatory. It sounded more like someone hoping for a softer version of the truth. Nora's reply was calm and steady, almost too gentle for the weight it carried. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. There's a difference." Her father paused, clearly unprepared for that answer. He wasn't used to Nora being so direct. He wasn't used to her not apologizing. He looked past her into the apartment, warm lighting, a neat little dining table, the steady hum of a working heater, a space that was small but whole. He sighed deeply, the fatigue in his voice now unmistakable. "We didn't know the service would stop so suddenly. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, they didn't notify anyone. Your mom thought we still had time. I didn't realize." Nora nodded, not sarcastic, not cruel, just clear. "I've always been the one on the contract, the one who made the calls, the one who handled it all, because no one else ever cared enough to." Silence settled between them, the kind that's been waiting for years to arrive. The wind howled down the hallway, echoing the emptiness she had once carried quietly inside. He tried to steady his voice. "Don't turn this into a tragedy. It's just been a hard year. Everyone's stressed. Mandy, she's going through more than you think." Nora let out a soft, cold laugh. "Every year is a hard year. Every year Mandy is going through something, and I'm the one who has to hold everything together." His gaze dropped to the ground. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "We don't have any more money. Your mom is sick. I sold Grandpa's watch collection to buy a little heating oil, but it'll only last a few days. Are you really going to just let us suffer?" Her heart twisted slightly at the mention of the watches, the only keepsake left from her grandfather. But the pain wasn't from the loss of the watches. It was from being needed only when everything had already fallen apart. She met his eyes. Calm, firm. "You told me not to come because Mandy needed peace. Well, I'm giving you peace now. I'm staying away." His face flinched, like he wasn't expecting her to remember so clearly. "You're punishing the whole family over one sentence spoken in frustration?" "This isn't punishment," she said. This is consequence." He stood there for a long moment. The man who once taught her how to tie her shoes, who used to carry her on his back through the Thanksgiving crowds, now looked completely lost, unable to recognize the woman his daughter had become. Nora opened the door a little wider, not to invite him in, but to let him see clearly the life she had built. It wasn't grand, but it was safe. Warm. Heron. "I'm no longer the daughter standing in the shadows, so everyone else can be in the light. I've done more than enough. It's time for you all to face what happens when the person who always fixed things finally walks away." Her father didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, absorbing what she said like snow melting into his coat. Then he turned. His steps left heavy imprints in the snow as he walked away, each one a mark of something broken, something let go. When Nora closed the door behind him, she didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt quiet. A week after the confrontation with her father, Nora had grown used to the quiet that now lived in her apartment. There were no more urgent phone calls, no pleading messages, no one saying, "We need you," and no one pretending she didn't exist. But that afternoon, as snow continued to fall in its quiet, habitual rhythm, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't urgent. It was hesitant, soft, like the person waiting behind the door wasn't sure she'd be allowed to speak. Nora walked to the hallway, flour still dusting her fingertips from a batch of cookies. She peeked through the peephole, and her heart paused for just a moment. It was her mother. Bundled in an old puffy coat, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, snow gathered on her shoulders. Her hands clutched a worn handbag. Her eyes were red, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Nora opened the door slightly, just enough to look her in the eye. Her mother spoke in a trembling voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." Nora didn't answer. She stood still, letting her mother decide how far she was willing to go. Taking a deep breath, her mother coughed lightly, then continued. "I've been thinking a lot about Thanksgiving, about all the winters before, and I realized I was wrong. Not just for telling you to stay away that day, but for letting you carry everything for so long without ever saying thank you." Nora didn't turn away, but she didn't invite her in either. The distance between them remained, a quiet boundary that held its own truth. "You kept the house warm for years," her mother said, her voice shaking. "You never complained, never asked for anything, and I stayed silent. I thought if I didn't say anything, no one would get hurt. But now I know, it was the silence that hurt you the most." Her voice cracked. She clutched her bag tighter, like it was the only thing holding her together. "Mandy. She says things shouldn't have gone this far. She told me she doesn't owe anyone anything." Nora let out a soft, dry laugh. Not bitter, just tired. "They only say I don't owe anyone, after I stopped paying." Her mother nodded slowly. No justifications, no defense, only truth. "You're right. But I didn't come here to ask you to carry it again. I just want you to know, you matter. And even if you never forgive me, I'll accept that." The silence that followed was longer than the snow-covered street outside. Nora opened the door a bit wider, not to invite her in, but to let her see clearly the warmth, the light, and the quiet she had built for herself. A life where her presence wasn't taken for granted. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not the same person either. I'm not going back to being the silent pillar that holds everything together." Her mother nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, fragile and quiet, like the woman herself. "You don't have to forgive me," she said, "but if someday you just need someone to listen, I'll still be here." She turned and walked away, her figure shrinking inside that oversized coat. No blaming, no pleading. Just a mother trying to walk back toward a daughter who had left long before her footsteps ever started. Nora closed the door, not with relief, not with sadness, just with a feeling of peace. As if, finally, someone had stopped long enough to truly hear her instead of assuming she'd always be fine. January passed quietly, like an instrumental song without lyrics. The city lay blanketed in ice and snow, but inside Nora's small apartment, warmth was ever present. Not from a costly heating system, but from the simple things: a humming space heater, a pot of ginger tea, soft jazz playing in the background, and the peace she had built with her own hands after too many winters spent feeling abandoned. Nora no longer waited for messages from her mother or Mandy. She didn't check social media to see who was rewriting her story through a more convenient lens. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life, Nora understood that peace doesn't come from being forgiven or recognized. It comes from forgiving yourself for living too long just to keep others comfortable. She still worked her shifts at the warehouse, still rose early, still visited the old bookstore every Friday. Life hadn't become glamorous, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as she sat by the window with a novel about women rebuilding after everything has fallen apart, Nora found herself smiling. Not because everything had become perfect, but because she had finally realized she didn't need it to be. Sometimes she still dreamed of the old house, the familiar kitchen, her father's footsteps, her mother's laughter, Mandy dancing across the living room. But when she woke, there was no ache. No longing. The past no longer held her captive. It had become what it was always meant to be, a chapter, not a cage. And that winter, for the first time in years, Nora was no longer the one shivering because of someone else's cold. She had chosen herself. And that was the most powerful thing she had ever done.